So, welcome everybody to our wonderful Pride weekend. And I'm so delighted to have Marla Renee with us today and another special guest who we'll get to in a moment. I'm really delighted that we're here talking about queer Black mamas embracing family. So much, even in that title, and more to get to in our discussion. This is actually my first time meeting Marla Renee. We've been chatting over chat and text and email, but it's such a pleasure to feel like I'm finally meeting you. And just to share a little bit, for those who don't know me, my name is Caroline Carrington. And I reached out to Marla initially when I was doing a panel on when will it be safe to go back to running in-person events again. And the most delightful thing happened. I love that you warned me. You gave me full disclosure up front. You would be there, provided you weren't in labor. And that morning, you were so good. You messaged me going, I think things are starting. So it's really amazing that we have your beautiful baby here with us today in the bonus feature. So thank you so much for being here. And I'd love it if you introduce yourself and the beautiful little being snuggling up next to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, it's finally great to meet you. And yeah, I'm Marla, everybody. I am a sexologist and sexual strategist, and I basically help people around sex and sexuality. Most helping people mostly around seduction, communication, and sex skills, and yeah, and so I did that with my company Velvet Lips, and I'm also the co-founder of the Sex Down South conference that happens every year in Atlanta. Of course, we'll be doing a hybrid conference this year. We did it online last year, and so this will be our 7th year running that conference. And yeah, today we're just going to talk about queer Black motherhood and sort of the family journey and what that means. And this is my little one, Malachi, who is sleeping at the moment. So we'll see if he wakes up anytime soon, but he's pretty comfortable. But yeah, I think that's
It's a
yeah.
great jumping off point. Thank you so much. So, when we start off, this word queer means different things to different people. What does it mean to you?
You know, I grew up in San Francisco, and thinking about queerness, it was really uh, for me political as well as sexual alignment, sexual orientation alignment. So queerness for me means um, not normal, um, and since we live in a very cisgender heteronormative white patriarchal society, I'm all of those things that are not that thing. So for me, well, I am cisgender, but for me, just that is where my queerness lies. So when I tell people, the simplest version of queer would be not normal, what we would consider normal in this society. And so it's also funny too, because with my co-founder Tia, people are like, oh yeah, is Tia queer? And Tia's like, I don't think I'm queer, but like, so she's like, I'm queer adjacent. Yeah. And I thought that was pretty cool, because it's sort of like when we think about like polyamorous people or non-monogamous people, or we think about kinksters or swingers, or folks who are traditionally on the margins, they are queer, disabled folks, sex workers, we consider them to be queer. But at the same time, we also have to think about what queerness means of where it came from, which is from sexual, quote unquote, deviant sexual practices or behavior orientation. So, uh, so yeah, I feel like there's a lot to queerness, um, uh, but I've been identifying as queer since I was, I wouldn't say 16. 16, I came out as bisexual to my parents. And then about when at 18, when I got to San Francisco, I was like, oh yeah, queer, that's it. Boom. And that felt really good to me. So yeah, then that's how I've been identifying ever since. So
I am loving your definition because, yeah, I identify as queer, and I'm very straight passing. And before, I sort of lost a few piercings, but anyway, I once I started getting into piercing, I starting to move a little off the mainstream. But mostly before that, I could pass quite easily, and I often thought that I wasn't cool enough to be queer because I didn't have the cool haircut, and I don't know if I dress mainstream, but anyway, I didn't feel like I qualified. So I love this queer adjacent. I kind of call myself a baby queer because there's still so much I'm learning. And the first time I was called queer was actually by a lover. And when I said, "Oh, I don't think I deserve that title," he said to me, "Oh, honey, you're definitely not straight."
that's funny.
But it was a huge compliment, actually. And for me, it's a lot about politically being inclusive and like welcoming people of all genders, all orientations, especially as a neo tantra teacher. So often that's taught in the gender binary, and the big emphasis is on like a heterosexual dynamic. I actually even had people yesterday on my Facebook thread talking about my son. Well, I was talking about my son asking for advice on dealing with a teenager, and they were all talking about, oh, when he falls in love with a girl. And I said, well, he may, but like it's not just restricted to that, and it happened repeatedly. So it's really interesting to notice we are just so programmed to be in this binary. And for
Oh
me,
yeah.
the binary doesn't even really exist necessarily. Like there's more than two.
Exactly, exactly. It's so funny, I catch Esther doing the same thing, and we're married and in this, and she'll be like, oh, he's gonna be so cute, he's gonna attract all the little girls, and I'm like, or boys or whomever, right? And so now she catches herself, because it's so ingrained in our society. And if she didn't grow up in San Francisco where I grew up, right? Like she grew up in here in the South. And so you the socialization is very, ingrained. So you really have to be conscious about how you navigate that and how you're speaking that into the world. But yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, I've talked about this concept of being queer with on videos, and I feel like I'm very open about it. But I came out to my mailing list this week.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and like for me, it wasn't even a big deal. I was talking about Pride and talking about this event, and I'm like, oh yeah, and I identify as queer. 10 people unsubscribed this week, and it was just really showing me, like, even just that. I mean, it was just I woke up and like 10 unsubscribes. Anyway, it's just so interesting. Even in this modern day liberal world, prejudice still exists, right?
Oh
Which
yeah.
is part of why raising awareness, I think, is so important. So you mentioned your partner, Esther,
Hmm.
and how long have you all been married?
We've been married. Great question. 3 or 4 years.
Like my sleep deprived brain don't make me count. This is being recorded.
3.5 years. Yeah.
Okay. Great. And what does raising a queer family mean to you? I mean, that's taking on a whole new meaning now.
Well, it's interesting to move into sort of the familial dynamic. When I started this journey of wanting to have children. First of all, when I was younger, I was like, I'm gonna have my career first, and then after I might get my career settled, I'm gonna have a baby, and and then go from there. But I don't want to have my baby alone. And I have had plenty of friends who have chosen to be single parents or solo parenting. Um, Props, because I just know I wouldn't be able to do this by myself. I absolutely not. But I moved. I was like, okay, so once turned 35, I was like, oh, it's time to like start this child journey. And so when I first started, I was, dating at the time. And when I thought about, okay, I want to become a parent now, I was dating a woman who was like, oh yeah, I'm all for it, let's do it. And we had only been together maybe 6 months, and I was like, I'm going to be on this journey. And so I had asked a couple of my friends, um, uh, I don't know if you're familiar with them or not, but Jet Setting Jasmine and King Noir. So King Noir is like a hip hop performer and porn star, and Jet Setting Jasmine is a porn star and therapist.
Oh,
And they're together, they're a couple. And so when they were staying at my house and we were talking, and I was like, how do you feel about having a baby with me? um and they were like, let's do it. And so I was planning on basically having I would basically be having the child most of the time. um and So we were trying to think about how to navigate that, because they live here in Florida, but they live in a different place, or they live some hours from here. So we were trying to figure all that out. Uh, and then when they came back into town, they told me, they were like, Jasmine's pregnant. And I was like, oh, shucks. So I knew that, it would be a lot to do it at the same time, right? To do, um, they had been wanting to get pregnant and for like 2 years, and it just wasn't happening. So they were like, well, let's just have this baby with Marla. And then they ended up getting pregnant. So I was just like, props to you, like,
right.
do it. I'll figure it out. Like, so, and I don't think they wanted more than one, where I wasn't sure if they wanted more than one or not. Um, so yeah, I think after that, it was just like, I broken up with that uh, girlfriend. Actually, she broke up with me, um, and um, and then came back 6 months later. But that's a whole nother story. Um, and then I just continued to date, and um, uh, even the people that I was dating, I was just, like, hey, I'm moving into this parenthood thing, so I'm just trying to find a donor, and like, if you're into this, like, it is what it is. And so when I met Esther, I gave her the same speech of, I want to be a parent. I'm getting older and I need this to happen soon. um, and considering with all of my friends who've had these journeys, they've taken a long time. Even my straight friends took 7 years to get pregnant. My queer friends took, years. And so I was like, if I have to start this journey, I got to start it, because it might take years. And I don't know what that's, I don't know how that is. And I don't have a penis on deck to just be like, let's go right now, so it takes a lot of planning.
Right.
um and so yeah, so when we got together, I told her this is what I wanted. She was okay with that. And then as we moved into getting serious, and eventually getting engaged and getting married, um instead of going on our honeymoon, we decided to go for the go for the child because we knew that it might take some time. So
Yes.
it took us about 9 months when we first started to finally saying I'm pregnant. So
Well, nine
um,
months seems pretty quick, actually,
it does.
considering.
It's very. I considered it to be very quick. She was
Yeah.
really worried for whatever reason, but I was like, that's pretty quick compared to um compared like thinking about the situation, and then compared to other friends of mine who have gone through this.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And now you've likely touched on, that things can be there can be some added complications for queer women who want to, or I guess even queer men or yeah, non-binary people.
Yeah, queer
But
folks. Hmm.
whatever you're comfortable with sharing, you did say this was a no holds barred interview. I did ask beforehand, but would you be open to sharing some of the things either that you thought would be challenging, or that ended up being challenging, or surprised you in this journey into becoming a mom?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, you know, uh, before I got pregnant, I was going to conferences, and I went to this panel that had all queer Black mamas, and they were talking about their journeys of how they became mamas. And one of them, who was a friend of mine, was like, I'm a lesbian and I slipped up and had sex with a man and had a baby. And and it's so funny because that is the rhetoric that we get a lot, like in society, like we hear a lot, right? It was just like, oh, I slept with a guy and I got pregnant. But it's not that easy. It is not, it's not like my mom's first time and was just like, I got pregnant the first time. It's not. And so I think one of the biggest lessons was that, like, it takes time. So when we first started, it was, we went to the IVF clinic, and um, I was like, I want to do AI, artificial insemination, first before we do the IUI or IVF or anything. Well, we didn't have a donor. We didn't have any friends that we liked, that we both liked, I should say. That,
It's a very personal
yes.
decision. Yes.
And so I ended up doing the IUI first, and it didn't take. And then we waited a month, came back, and we tried to do it ourselves with the frozen vials, frozen sperm. And that those also didn't take, and we did those a few times. And so we were like, we need to find a donor, because it's free.
Right?
Yeah,
Less
it was,
complicated.
yeah, it's more because those little tiny, tiny vials were like more than $1,000 a piece. We would have a couple each round, time I was ovulating. So it's a lot of money that adds up. And then and when we found a donor, he's like, no, I'll just do it for free. I just like helping. And for us, it was really important to find a Black donor. And there are not a lot of Black donors. Even in the databases, the sperm donors, they're very little. You have maybe 5 choices to choose from when there's like
Really?
a ton, thousands and thousands of white donors.
Wow.
Um, and Hispanic donors are higher too, but yeah, Black donors are really low. So it was really like trying to find a needle in a haystack. And luckily I was in this Facebook group, and someone DM'd me and was like, hey, here's a guy, try him. That's who I'm trying. And you know and so I tried him. He said yes. And, few, like 2 rounds of AI didn't work. And then on third round, third time's a charm, and it worked. So, yeah. But of course, that's a lot of planning, right? It's like, I'm ovulating. When are you available to come over to ejaculate in this cup so we
Right.
can, get it in this syringe? And, um, so it was very much a, uh, it was a challenge, trying to coordinate schedules and all that stuff. So,
Mm.
um, so yeah, that was sort of how that happened. And it's interesting because I have a client right now who is, I wouldn't necessarily say queer, but almost queerness in the sense of like she's asexual and her husband is not. Her husband is we call it endosexual, or it's just a sexual person. And so she's just like, I don't want to have sex to have this baby. And I'm like, well, I didn't have sex with a penis to have this baby. Like, there are other ways to have a baby. And so I introduced her onto how I got pregnant. And she was like, oh, this is like the best thing ever. And so even it's like, even in the context, we can use queerness in straight people's lives. Like, straight people need queerness too, like, because it's a way to think outside the box, essentially, into getting what you want. And so, yeah, maybe sometimes being queer can be a hindrance for some folks, but in my life, I haven't found it to be a hindrance. I know you said, you had a bunch of people unsubscribe, and for me, it's just like, it is who I am. Like, there's, and I never, and for me, my queerness, I like to normalize my queerness.
Mhm.
So it's never like just like I don't know how to say this, like thinking about like even when I'm doing my work or when I'm sending out a newsletter or something like that, I'm just like my wife Esther. Like, I don't like, it's a part of me. So I don't like make it a big deal. Um but I think that probably goes along with the fact that I've been like this since I was 16. So, I'm not, my life hasn't changed um
You're
for
just
me.
living being you, who
Yeah.
you, yeah, that's awesome. I think that is such a wonderful way to model to people. Um, it's always interesting because I'm pretty out there for a lot of people around sexuality. I'm imagining, like I said to you before, is there anything I can't talk, we can't talk about? You're like, my life's an open book.
Yep.
And I tend to be the same, right? So doing classes, for example, on female ejaculation and being the demo, that's not edgy for me. That's just like normal. But if I had to like get up on stage and do contact improv or something like that would be edgy for me. Or like I'm South African, so my sense of humor is very different to the US and even England. And so, like, when people are like, I've got a great joke for you, this will be really funny, like, that's edgy for me. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting. We all have our edges, they just come in different shapes and sizes. So we're getting some questions in. And I also
Hmm.
wanted to know this actually. You explained what artificial insemination is, but what is an IUI?
IUI is a intrauterine insertion or something like that. So basically, what they do is they have this long tube, and they insert the tube inside of your uterus. So inside of the cervix. So if you have the cervix is right here, so they have the tube comes out, and then they use the frozen sperm, and then they basically inject it through the tube directly into the uterus. Um, so that uh, yeah, so that it
That the
goes
swimmers
directly into,
can get to the goalpost.
exactly, rather avoid the acidic vaginal canal,
Right, where
right?
anything could go wrong.
So just
Because
straight in
it
the
is
uterus.
funny when sperm enters the vagina, there's so much. There is so
Hmm.
much that can go wrong. In many
Hmm.
cases, it is kind of a miracle. I mean, I still find it
It
a miracle,
is.
even though my son is now a teenager. I'm like, I think I'm more in
Babies.
awe of him now. I'm like, you grew inside me. Like, that still blows my mind.
Absolutely.
And when it was happening and when I was pregnant, like for me, I was so wrapped up in the experience and honestly quite overwhelmed with it all. I was like, how did that miracle of life happen? I didn't even have time to process that. I was just changing diapers and we talked before about sleep deprivation because that's
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, every single human being is a miracle. if we think about it. I mean, I think it's like 20% of people, 20, your chances of getting pregnant are 20%. So, and essentially, I feel like every human being that is on this earth is a miracle baby, like it's incredible.
I love hearing that because that actually, even though my son's totally embarrassed about, he's 14, so everything's embarrassing about his parents. But I call him my miracle child because he was like the most delightful surprise of my life. I had an IUD and my now ex-husband had slow sperm, and so we really were not planning. Always wanted
Wow.
to be a mother, so and it was the right kind of time, and it's amazing how these miracles come into our lives at the
Yeah.
perfect
Wow.
time. So yeah, he really wanted to be here. He had tried IVF with his first partner, I believe, for about 10 years, and they couldn't conceive. And
Wow.
eventually adopted. They adopted. So I'm off the
Wow.
hook. I only had to produce one, and I'm like, that is
You're
fine.
like, I'm good.
Yes. So I want to just make sure I'm attending to our participant questions. So
Yeah.
one of our participants was asking a little bit more about the donor. She was asking, are you still in touch with him, and is he still happy about doing it, about being the donor?
Yes, we are still in touch with him because we are doing reciprocal IVF. So he needs to go to the clinic to give his sperm. My wife doesn't want to carry, so I'll be carrying my wife's egg. So that's reciprocal IVF. So they'll be doing the harvesting with her eggs, and then they'll pair the sperm and the egg together and put them in me. So that is that's the next step for that. So yes, we are still in touch. Yeah, uh, we talk to him when we need to. We don't really. I mean, it's not like he's a friend or anything like that. Although for the clinic, we had to say he was our sexually intimate partner in order to avoid $5,000. So he
Oh,
can be a sexually intimate partner, whatever, because I had a baby with
so
him.
why did you have to, sorry, this wrinkle's totally interesting. Why were they requiring that? Why would they charge you more if you weren't partners?
Because it would just be a donor, like instead of it would be like not a person but a donor instead of like someone and had a baby with already. So yeah.
So, I mean, some of what you're sharing is it's actually quite a big financial investment, like on top of just having the
Oh
baby,
yeah.
because we thankfully had insurance. Yeah, I'm just like going back 14 years. But even so, if we hadn't had insurance, I think my birth, because I ended up having an emergency C section and like all sorts of things went wrong. That child did not want to come out. Anyway, I had a birth plan. They told me I could write a birth plan.
Hmm.
Well, they shouldn't tell that to like a triple type A person. I had the plan typed out on 3 printed sheets of paper. I handed it all out. The nurses all laughed at me. They were
Yeah.
very gracious, but like nothing went according to plan on my birth plan. But just that alone was about $100,000 to have a baby in the
Hmm.
US. And we were able to conceive, without needing medical intervention. But then after they're born, like we bought everything. And then I was like, great, we've got it all for the first 2 weeks, and then they've outgrown everything and they need new stuff, right? I mean, having a baby, especially I find in the US, it's a really big financial undertaking.
Oh
um,
yeah.
and it sounds like even more so now, you know doing it using, and even straight families have to deal with using
Oh
medical
yeah.
intervention
Oh
sometimes.
yeah. I think for us, the total cost for the reciprocal IVF is $11,000. I think when we were at the IVF clinic before him, like doing all of those things, we probably spent around maybe 10 to 11 grand before that. Um, on the extra stuff because insurance only covered so much. So I can't even imagine what the insurance. I don't even know what the insurance was. And then once they found that I'm like not infertile, right? So my AMH levels were high, which means that I have a very high number of eggs and very good quality. So like I have a quality of eggs of somebody who's like 10 years younger.
Ah,
Um,
amazing.
so Yeah, so it was just like, well, you have good eggs, so there's no reason why you can't go out and get pregnant, right? So, I guess that's sort of the truth, but um so that's what that's what we did. We just had to find that donor and get it done. So, um but yeah, it is financial. I went to a birth center, so I opted not to go to the hospital, especially with pandemic times. They're really restrictive. People catch COVID at hospitals. So we really just did not want to be at a hospital. And considering I work from home, I'm home all the time. So that wasn't a big change for me, um, but it costs for the birth center, it costs about $7,000 to that we came out of pocket. Um, if I were to go to the hospital, it would have been free. So, um, so yeah,
Right. I
there's
remember
that.
even when I looked, obviously that was a long time ago, but we couldn't afford it. We couldn't go to a birth center.
Mm-hmm.
Like if
And
you,
it's so interesting, right? Because I'm paying for a place to do this naturally. Isn't that insane? Like, just to hear myself say that, like, I have to pay out of pocket to do something that we already do naturally. So I had no meds. I just had my midwives, coaching me through it. And I mean, for centuries people have been doing this, so
right.
it's just like the whole medicalization of birth is just and the fact that I wanted to stay out of hospital because doctors are notorious for discrimination in taking out, especially Black women, our ovaries, our reproductive systems, our uteruses, and just saying like, it wouldn't have surprised me if I had to go to a hospital and the doctor was like, well, she's 41 or 40, like we can go ahead and take out her uterus. Um, it wouldn't have surprised me, which is why on my birth plan I was like, if I have to go to a hospital, like if a hospital is necessary, I want a Black doctor, I want my midwife there, Esther needs to be there, and they cannot remove my reproductive system, they cannot remove anything. If they say it's a matter of life and death, I don't care. I do not remove do They need to work it out, do the best they can to help me survive. Um because I want to have another child, and but there's just there had a lot of it is just there's no need to do it. And it's yeah, it's sort of it's such a trip, like even like ultrasounds during care. I had one ultrasound, and that was the only ultrasound that I needed. And then I went back a month later because when I went to the hospital, so I couldn't get an appointment quick enough. So I went to the hospital to see like what's going on. I think around like maybe 10 weeks or so. And um they were like, okay, you're over 40 or you're over 35, so you need to go to have an ultrasound every month. And then I was
Every
just like, for
month.
what? Huh?
Every month.
Yeah,
That's
every month. They need to
wow.
really look at me every month. And I just thought, what for? What are you going to do? What can they do? And so I went for a one original, everything was fine. Went to the second one, everything was fine. And actually that second one actually predicted he'd be born on April 24th. And then
Oh,
I had a strain. So he was kicking on I had a fibroid that had grown. And so my midwife was just like, let's just go get an ultrasound just to see. Everything was fine. So they were like, you need to come back every week. And midwife was like, you don't need to do that. Like, I was like, yeah, go ahead and cancel that. There's no, like, what can they do? Nothing. Just, and I guess for people, it's good for their state of mind or just want to relax about stuff. But I was pretty, I guess, relaxed about the whole situation. So, um, yeah, for me, it wasn't necessary.
It's really interesting. I remember I got my first IUD. This is becoming quite an intimate conversation. Anyway, and it was the IUD I got pregnant on my son with. They're very effective. I said to the doctor, "Why did you give me this birth control if it doesn't work?" He's like, "It does. It is more effective than the pill." So part of why I call my son the miracle baby. He really wanted to be here.
Hmm.
Anyway, they they started saying to me, and I think I was like 28 or 29 when I got the IUD. They were like, if you want to have a baby, you have to start thinking about it soon, because after I think it's 35, the risk, like you become a high risk pregnancy. And then like I knew I always wanted to be a mother. It really freaked me out. So for those that are interested in looking into birth and how to really advocate for yourself, a movie that I wish I'd seen before I had my baby was the Business of Being Born. I don't know if you've heard about that one, but it talks a lot about how the
No.
medical interventions, and you really have to know to advocate. So anyway, we'll drop that in as a reference. You and I agreed beforehand this wasn't going to be, we weren't going to talk the whole thing about birthing stories. And
Oh, no, that's okay. I mean, it's, it, if the midwives are everything, and they have all the information. But it is a business. I mean, and for me, that's very clear as a business person, as an entrepreneur. It's very clear to me that it's there's such a huge business model. So
well, I wanted
from
a
the
total,
medicines to the hospitalization to all of that stuff.
yeah, it's very eye opening.
So I
I had
texted
wanted
you
a
at
full,
9 a.m. and I was at home by 9 p.m. You know?
wow. I'm very envious. My labor was 41 and a half hours.
Oh my gosh.
It was a long thing. Anyway, we're veering into birthing stories. So I'm going to focus back again on our
Yeah.
participants and their questions.
Hmm.
Going back to the donor, did you do any genetic investigation before deciding that his donation was the right one for you?
Yeah, so him and his ex-wife were trying to also have a baby. So he had done his genetic, they had gone through the IVF process and were unsuccessful. He had done his genetic information. So he was negative on his genetic stuff. I was positive on the spinal muscular atrophy, and which is interesting because so was Esther. Also was positive on that, but everything else was negative. So we ended up being compatible. And then when they did Malachi's genetic test, everything was fine. So,
Great. Okay, so you did, I mean, because you do have to ask those kinds of
oh
questions,
yeah, absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And is he a part of the baby's life or not as
Mm,
much?
mm-mm.
So really he's just a donor. And um does the baby see photos of him? Is he, are you going to, do you know if you're going to tell him
Yeah,
anything about
absolutely. Like if he wants to know, absolutely. I'm part of a donor siblings group on Facebook. So Malachi has a bunch of donor siblings. So if he wants to get to know them, he can do that too. So I'm connected to them as well.
great? These questions are amazing. They are quite personal, so please just answer
Yeah,
what
no,
you're
it's okay.
comfortable with answering. Did you guys come up with any kind of legal document okay, so can you speak to the legalities of that and also his parental rights if you're comfortable answering that? Like, how did you make sure that whatever you'd agreed beforehand keeps on going, now that your beautiful baby's born?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we had a contract to release any kind of parental rights. Just say he's a donor. So that was pretty easy. That wasn't a complication. He he had done this probably 40 times before. So Malachi
Ah,
has a bunch of donor siblings. When I say a bunch, I think
wow.
it's around that number. So and I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up, because I've had actually a couple of friends ask me about the donor using the donor, and would it be weird? And I don't think it's weird, because I'm like, just make sure that, he gets genetically tested, or whoever he dates gets genetically tested, making sure. But he's got a lot of siblings from all around the country.
And in time, do you think that you'll get them connected? Will they know about each other?
I think it's really fascinating. And, I thought about that. And that's something I think I probably would want to pose, like in the donor sibling group. Um, because yeah, I mean, he has donor siblings very close to us. So
Amazing. So the potential is there if you decide you want
yeah, the
to
potential is
do
there
that.
if we decide we want to. And like I said, we're friends with him, or we talk to him when we need to talk to him. So yeah, for us, it's not that. It's not a big of a deal for me, because it's sort of like, this is how you came into the world, and we were very purposeful about how we brought you here. And I think that's important, you know.
Well, it's so interesting. I think this concept of the modern family, or of family, has changed so much in the modern world. Like if I look at my own family, which on the outside I suppose looked very um, I'm going to use the word mainstream more than normal, sort of what one would expect.
Yeah.
But however, well, I won't go into all the fucked up stuff about the family I was raised in, but like on the outside, it kind of looked mainstream, but there were a lot of unusual things. And in my current family, even though I'm not married anymore, I still consider them my family. And my son's brother is adopted from Vietnam. And he was raised in America since he was 9 months old. His parents adore him and went to Vietnam and were so delighted to get him after 10 years of trying to have a baby themselves. And now he's really embracing um, his his Vietnameseness, I guess you'd say, and he's an adult, so he can make up his own decisions. But so many people, I think, are dealing with blended families, even if they are heterosexual. And I loved what you said earlier about how even heterosexual families or heterosexual couples can learn a lot from queer people. And I noticed this around queer sex. This comes up a lot when people come to me as a pleasure and intimacy expert around sex. And so often people's concept of what sex even is one bit goes into another bit. And I'm using those words intentionally because what's
Mm-hmm.
what, right? But the thing I love about queer sex is it opens up the possibilities. Like that is actually really limiting, and people's concept of what sex even is quite limited if you just have like one part goes into another part. Most people think of that as intercourse in some fashion. That's one tiny aspect of what sex even is.
Oh
And
yeah.
I feel like queer sex gave me the permission. I mean, hand sex is wonderful, mouth sex is wonderful. It's
Mm-hmm.
still sex. There's a sort of a famous thing that I quote often. I talk about a queer man that I dated for about 5 years. Um, and he's very polyamorous, way more promiscuous than I am. And he's very open about that, so he's not hiding it from anybody. And we're both poly, and we didn't have intercourse because I would get too attached and he wasn't available for that. We had the best time ever. We did all sorts of things. We just didn't do what most people consider the main event. So I
Right.
think there's so much that, um, and it's part of why I was excited to do this video. There's so much that we can learn from queer people about how to explore ourselves and how to create families. And a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of even heterosexual couples struggle to just conceive, the whether you call it the natural way or the biological way, but science has come so far
Oh
and
yeah.
literally can create miracles.
Yeah. And it's sort of like, the concept of a queer family, or just queering family, or just queering reproductive ways. It's like, it's sort of, that's what IVF is. That's what IUI is. That's what artificial insemination is. It's a queering of what we have traditionally deemed as what should how babies come into the world, right? The birds and the bees conversation, right? Well, these are like the birds and the bees and the lizards and the whatever. I mean, whatever, it's just sort of like there's all sorts of ways. But anyway, I wanted to touch upon something that you said around what not queer sex, but just sex and how sex can be all sorts of things. In our book that I wrote with Dr. Jess O'Reilly, it's called The Ultimate Guide to Seduction and Foreplay. We talk about what we believe sex is. And sex is like not only hand sex, oral sex, or penetrative sex. Hand sex is, sex is.
Oh, we might have lost you for a second, Marla. Are you still with us, Naomi? Okay, good. I can see you. I'm going to see if I can message Marla. I don't want to lose her, but I imagine if her internet or something goes down, then she'll just pop back on. Let me just see um, if I can message her. Okay, I messaged her, and we'll just see what happens. I'm really loving the questions that are coming in, and I am going to honor that Marla will be with us just for a few more moments. So, is there anything you want to make sure that we cover before we wrap up? Just, there we go. She is on her way back. We lost you for a second. I'm glad you're back. So sorry, you were wanting to refer back to something, and you had talked about your book, The Ultimate Guide to Seduction and Foreplay, and then we lost you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Comcast seems to have its way. So in our book, we talked about what sex is, and sex is not only hand sex, oral sex, anal sex, or any kind of penetrative sex, but it is also about it is the seduction piece, it is the foreplay piece, it's the mental stimulation. That is what we consider to be sex, because without that is the thing that gets people off. Or what are the things that mentally stimulate someone that could get someone off, right? We say our brain is our biggest sex organ. Well, those are the ways that we need to connect. So I just think it's important to it reminds me of one of my best friends when I told her that I like women, and she goes, "Well, what do you do? Well, how do you have sex?" And I'm like, "Seriously? Like, what do you do?" Like what? Yeah. And so it's um I think and even with my straight couples that I coach, sometimes I really have to tell them, like, sex is not only penis in the vagina. There is more to sex. What kinds of things are you doing? Are you doing hand sex? Are you doing oral sex? And or are you doing the seduction piece? Are you communicating? How are you stimulating each other's brains? Like, what are the things that you're doing to get you off? And so and sometimes it's just that the notion of like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. And so for me, it's like the queer perspective comes into play, because, and I think that's probably why I get a lot of straight people. They're like, we can't think ourselves around this problem. They kind of are very laser focused. And then I'm like, there's A, B, C, D, E, F. Which one do you want to do? And they're like, oh, I didn't realize I had all of these other options. And so, yeah, I think queerness is the ability to, like I said before, think outside the box, think in a way that gives people many options instead of just one. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's so important, and I love ABCDEF. or it could be in any jumble of that order, right?
Mm-hmm.
That same person I dated for 5 years, it was probably the most creative sex I'd ever had with one partner, because every single time we would come together, he'd say to me, "So, what are you up for today?" And it was a genuine inquiry. Both of us had quite broad appetites of what we were interested in. And we just looked for, like, what are the top three things you want to include today? And it can be so refreshing, even for couples that have been together a really long time. Because, people tend to get into their
Oh
ruts,
yeah.
one kiss here, and then, you keep going down. Um, and then it can be all over in 5 minutes. And I often say, I don't even want to put my makeup on for that. Like, it's not worth it.
Yes, yes.
So I know we're getting to the end of our time, and I want to. Oh, baby's woken up. Hi. Oh,
It's
kind
just
of. We got a
sleeping.
moment. I got all excited. It's so cute when they're that stage. Um, if you could just sort of sum up some of your hopes and dreams, or if we call them goals, but as a queer parent, what you want both for yourself as a queer mama and for your beautiful boy.
Yeah, I want, as a queer person in the world, I would like for people, especially in the medical industry, to be more intentional about how they address people. Like, even though I'm cisgender, I just think about non-binary folks who want to have babies, or trans folks who want to have babies. And um, I remember when Malachi had jaundice and had to get phototherapy. Now, when we went to the phototherapy, the nurse was like, "In my country, we just put him out in the sun for a week," and I was like, "Of course," but of course I get the pediatrician who's like, "Go to the hospital now." Um,
That's all. That's what they all say these days, I think.
yeah,
Yes, you
and
can put them
and
in the sun.
right, right, and but even with our insurance.
Oh, I think we've got the blessings of Comcast interrupting us again, so we'll just have to see. This is the joy of online classes. You've just got to roll with the punches and be flexible. Um, I will just say, because we are going to wrap up, so I know there have been more questions than we've even had time for, which is so awesome. Thank you so much for all your wonderful questions. But we're going to let her wrap up shortly, just because she's going to need to go and attend to baby. Um, but she may be open to, you asking her questions on her radio show or in another format. So it's okay. I was just I was just sharing that if people have more questions, I know we're getting close to wrapping, that we'll talk about how best to contact you. So sorry, you were talking about the medical establishment and for example, Malachi, did I get that right? Thank you. I was getting it wrong before we got on the call. But that Malachi had to go under the or had to get phototherapy. Maybe I'm getting old or something. I think that's possible. But they used to put heat lamps. Is that the same thing? Or oh, I've got to unmute you. Sorry. Let me ask to unmute. I don't know why that brought you unmuted. There we go.
Um, so, uh, yeah, like, but anyway, the woman who took our insurance saw me and was like, "Oh, okay, you're the mama," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, I'm the one that birthed the baby, yes." And then she looks at Esther and was like, "Oh, okay, are you the grandma?" And I was like, Esther is 8 years younger than me. I'm 41. And so I was like, what? I was like, that's my wife. Like, where did you get grandma? And I think because we have the same last name, she just could not, like, her connection was maybe I was a single mom who's, like, even her worldview was distorted, right? Like, oh, you must be some other relative, not her partner, right? Like, even thinking that, I thought that was very fascinating. So that was just sort of not only queerness, but racial issues that came into play as well. Um, or the stigma around that. Um, uh, so yeah, I think that's what I was saying. I can't even remember what my point was now. I'm gonna
That's okay. We
get
know
it
new
wrong.
mamas also, what do you have, mommy brain and sleep
Yeah.
deprived brain. And then we have pandemic brain. So you get
Oh yeah.
all the spaciousness in the world.
Oh, what I was gonna say. Yeah. Oh, so what I want for people is to have an open mind, just to know that, like, not to make assumptions around people and their reproductiveness and how they formed their family. I think just ask questions. Uh, Esther and I, we were looking at a house, and the realtor was like, "Oh, did you adopt?" Like, I was like, "No, this baby came through my vagina."
You
And
responded like that? I
oh yeah,
love
I
it.
was like, that was traumatizing. I was like, no, that baby came through my vagina. I remember all the things. Um,
I carried it. I
yeah.
birthed him. Yes.
And then they were just kind of quiet. And and when Esther and I got back in the car, we were like, I bet you they wanted to ask how, but they just were afraid. And we didn't volunteer that information. So my wish for people is, like, even if you're not familiar with queer folks, or you don't come across them very often, just ask questions. Like, don't be afraid to ask questions. And if someone says it's none of your business, then just mosey on your way. But some of us, like me, are open books, and I'll be glad to say, hey, we had a donor, we did artificial insemination. That's what we did. He came to the house, ejaculated in a cup. We put it in a syringe. We put that syringe inside of me. We put some lovely music on.
Right?
But like, just don't be afraid to ask questions to get answers so that you can be more informed about how queer folks get their queer families. So I think it's important, and we should all know what kind of journeys we've gone through. So
And
yeah.
and that can help people of all orientations and all people who want to create families, like you've been saying, think outside the box for how they can create their own families, because
Hmm.
this boy meets girl at 16, and then your one true first love, and you all lived happily ever after with a white picket fence. Like, most of us are not living that reality anymore.
Mm-mm.
Even if you are heterosexual and straight. So I
Right.
loved how willing you've been to open up about very intimate, specific, personal questions, and really creating a safe space for us to ask, because I know that can often be a concern of mine, being inclusive and respectful. Even though I consider myself queer, I think I said at the beginning about feeling like I'm a baby queer. Like, I feel like I still have so much to learn. um, but having wonderful people like you, where you're open to just talking about it, because for some people it is uh, really personal and they don't wish to discuss it. So thank you for being a great resource for community and continuing to share, even literally, even when you are being mama. I was at a chanting event once, and somebody talked about this practice of parenting. It's like and my son was there, he was little, running around like a mad thing, but but you know we do, as parents, you end up doing your work with baby attached, and I was going to do my spiritual practice with my baby attached, but you have to be in. I mean, you being very present with us on the screen, and you know I'm sure if Malachi needed you, then you would hop to it right away.
Absolutely.
So I want to make sure that people can find you and can. I know there were actually even more questions than we got time for, but I want to honor the agreement you and I
Yeah,
made.
I mean, if you want to, I don't mind. He's sleep as long as he stays. Like, if he starts to get fussy, then we could go. But I'm okay answering a couple more questions if you want to.
Okay. Well, all right. If you're giving your consent, then I'm going to go ahead. So, one of the other questions is, what are some of your goals in as a queer Black woman in parenting your child in this world? What are some of your goals, knowing that you're only, are we counting in weeks or in months? It's like 2 months.
He's 2 months.
Right. So you're kind of at the beginning of that journey. So this answer may evolve, but wherever it stands today.
Yeah. So with my parenting journey, my goals are, I'm really adamant about him being with me and educating him. So I want to homeschool. So I really want to homeschool. You know, teaching at the university, I was like, oh no, you will not go to public school. I mean, I think I went to great public schools, but honestly, like I want to do homeschooling because I feel like I could probably give him a really stellar education, not only around school stuff, but just around life stuff. Um, and so I'm excited to do that. You know, raising a Black boy is in and of itself going to be a challenge in this world. So, you know, having to educate him about what it's like in America, what our history is, and, you know, to teach him to keep his head high and rise above, I think, but also be realistic is going to be the huge challenge I think I'm going to have to undertake as a parent. Um, and um, but and my goals are just to raise him well and to make sure that he gets what he needs, and um, you know, to uh, yeah, to help him being an all around, you know, good person, good human being. So that's my ultimate goal, you know.
I think he's very blessed to have a wonderful mama in you. And I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Esther yet, but I got to see this beautiful snapshot on Facebook. And I don't know if it was a mama's group or just a group of your friends, but you were all out with your
Yeah.
babies having a walk. And it was just, I'm still friends with some of the women that I was in a mother's. We went to Gymboree together and we were all going through big life transitions. And you need that as a new mama. You need connections. I mean, community really does make a huge difference because my experience of parenting was, I was now living in a totally different country on a different continent, and I didn't have family here supporting me. And that's also true for many queer folks, like even trans
Hmm.
people having kids. Like often they've been excommunicated from their families just for being who they are, So we don't always have that around us. So having chosen family out of community, um, I think is a really important part of it. And I notice I'm I'm currently in America, but I've actually moved to Mexico. That was one of the gifts of the pandemic. But I've noticed in this trip back here how nourishing it is for me to just have community around me because I'm building that. I've only been in Mexico like 4 months, and it's much harder when you just don't have your people there. And I noticed like 3 days in, I'd already seen more people than I normally do in 2 weeks. And it was just so nourishing to like know that you have people who love you and that you can see. And I couldn't even hug them yet because I've only had my first shot. So it is really important to have that
Oh yeah,
support. And it looks
support.
like you have amazing community both online and in person.
Yeah, I do. I do. I have a really great group of friends who we call family, our family, you know, our we support each other, and not all of our families are, like you said, supportive. I pretty much don't talk to like one side of my biological family. Um, and it sucks, and Esther has doesn't talk to one side of her biological family, so it's sort of, when you have families that are homophobic or very religious, which kind of the homophobia thing, um or you just, or they are toxic in some way, shape, or form. You have toxic family members. I know some people just have toxic family members, and it's best to choose to have your chosen family, to have that support system, not only online but in person. When I need someone to, like, hey, can you watch him for me, or hey, I need help, can you help me? I'm so happy that we have that support system here.
Yeah. We've also, we even as we came up with the title, I noticed in this interview we've been talking more about, we focused much more on queerness, but you talked about raising a Black son in the
Hmm.
United States, and um, I'm trying to remember if it was in our prep or on the video. I think it was on the video. I talked about the fact that I was raised in apartheid South Africa. So for me, and my dad's British, and I have like German, my grandpa's German. So I have like a lot of karma to undo and unlearn. And then I didn't grow up in the US. So one of my goals in the pandemic was actually to educate myself much more on Black history and to just start learning, because there's obviously been a very big conversation about Black Lives Matter, which they do in this
Hmm.
country. And um, you touched on it when you were talking about raising a Black son, but I noticed yesterday, I'm about to get political. You told me nothing was off limits, so I hope that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
If you private message me, I'll know to be quiet. But I mean, there are different considerations you have in raising a Black son. Things are, the Derek Chauvin sentencing happened yesterday. It was so interesting. I didn't see a whole lot of that on social media.
I'm not on the news. I'm not on social media.
You're like, I'm kind of busy right now. I've just had a baby. So it's totally fine that you haven't. But, I've been in conversation with a lot of people around the Black Lives Matter movement and about, like, are things actually changing? Because a whole lot of people were protesting around the country, actually around the world. This I was going to say this summer, no, last summer, right around the murder of George Floyd. And while I thought that was wonderful, I do think the pandemic also added to that, because I do think some of the white folks that were protesting just, it certainly helped the movement, but they were just out because they were tired of being at home, right? But it does seem, at least to me as a white person, and I'm curious on your experience, especially now that you're raising a Black man, well, to be a man, Black boy into a man. Like, do you think things are actually starting to change in the US? Because there's, like, this is a big question, but there's systemic racism. And then, I mean, thank goodness we've got a new president now who at least is trying to make things, turn things around. But there's a long way to go. When somebody who grew up at the height of apartheid, I'm about to age myself, but I was born in 1978. So I was born at like the height of petty apartheid. I grew up in a really racist country. To be in America, I was shocked when I arrived 16 years ago at how racist it was here. I was like, because I didn't know America was seen as this, like, model of the world. And no offense to any Americans, but I've become quite disillusioned. It's part of why I'm going to keep living in Mexico, because I just, the injustice and inequity really bothers me here. So, sorry, this is a long preamble to say, do you think that with the highlighted conversation around the importance of Black lives and the advocacy, and at least to a small degree, some of the police just starting after 400 years to be held accountable, do you think the tide is starting to shift? Are you feeling optimistic about Black lives in the United States? Or are you, yeah, where do you stand with that? Sorry, huge question.
No, no, it's great. It's a great question because, you know, Black folks have been victims of violence for a very long time. So for me, it's nothing new. So, even with the protests last year, it was nothing new. What was new is that white folks were trapped in the house and had to see it.
Yes.
That is the new. So it's sort of like with the technology and the social media and seeing it, That is the new part. Um, and so I think because of that, they're more, you know, companies, more organizations are doing, diversity and inclusive, training, committees, things like that, which I think are very helpful and useful. And we see more of it. There's more awareness around, what Black folks are going through. Um, I, um, but yeah, it's for me to raise him. I think is going to be. I think I just have to see what's going to be happening in the world. Are things going to be changing? I don't know. Um, uh, I hope so. I hope so. And I think that's part of maybe the fear of mine and why I want him in the house or why I want to homeschool him, and I mean, of course he's going to be able to, play sports because, I'm an athlete. I gotta make sure he's in sports. But, but like, uh, just the fear of not getting maybe the same education, or treating him like he's a rebel or, just all sorts of stigma that, people put on other people of different identities. So I want to avoid that altogether, but also make him realize, like, hey, like, you know, it's important to recognize that um, there are people out there that don't like you, and that goes for everybody. And so you got to make sure that you are doing the things you need to do to stay safe. Um, and I think that's the only thing we can do.
Well, I notice as a mum that we obsess. I remember I had a book, I think I still have it somewhere, with every pee and every poop and every, how long he nursed for at the time, like you're obsessing around every detail. And now that my son's a teenager, he's differentiating really hard and wanting to become his own person, which is normal and natural and really hard for me. Because I love being close. I love the intimacy. Um, that I think only a mom and a parent can have with their little being. Anyway, but I have to just look at letting him now. He's just graduated from middle school. He's more and more out in the world, and I can't wrap him up in cotton wool, and I can't protect him from something a kid says at school. Or and he said, Mom, you have no idea, it's so hard at middle school. And he's white. He doesn't have racial challenges in the same way non-white people have, I think, all over the world. We've seen it even with the aggressions against Asian people since the outbreak of the
Hmm.
pandemic this year. So, um, yeah, I find it quite challenging as a mama, because we adore our babies and we just want the best for them, and we can't protect them forever.
Right.
So I think your beautiful boy is very lucky to have such a badass mama who is fearlessly living
Thank
who
you.
you are in the world, as a beautiful template for how he can stand in his magnificence, however that ends up translating for
Hmm.
him. Well, I want to make
Thank
sure
you.
that people can find you, and also to know what you've got coming up next. And I just have to say again, I'm so impressed at how quickly you're back to work. I took like 4 months, and then I just did nannying so that I could stay home with my kid because I couldn't, it was too overwhelming for me. But you have so much coming down the pipeline, so please share with us.
Well, I don't have too much. I've limited some stuff, but I do have Sex Down South is happening, of course, this year in September. So folks can use my code Marla SDS for 20% off of their registration. So you can go to sexdownsouth.com for that. For those of you who were like, I don't know what's outside the box. How do I think outside the box as far as like sexually? You can use that link, the bit.ly.eroticme, and that is erotic activity bucket list. And I've realized that it helps people, like regardless if you're straight or queer, it just helps people see what other things you can do that are very sexual and sexy and fun. And so, you can knock it off your list or just have a conversation, with your lover or lovers about what what you want to do and what you can do and what, all the things that turn you on. So you can feel free to hit that link there or get that download for free. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have going on. Really, is just Sex Down South. And of course, if you sign up for my email list, you'll know when I present at different shops around the country and doing virtual workshops. I'll be doing some in-person workshops in Atlanta and here in South Florida. So you can just follow me there. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being so generous with that wonderful resource. I'm going to go and check that out.
Yeah.
Even as a sex educator myself, I'm always interested to see if they're. I realized the other day, this is another whole video, but I'm like, I'm ecosexual. And I was admitting that to a friend of mine on a hike, and I was like, that's another whole part of my identity that's just sort of been dawning on me over a little while. Anyway, we'll leave
Yes.
that as a cliffhanger for another conversation. But there's so much for all of us to learn, because even our sexual appetites and our needs and our desires change over time.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for being part of helping to raise awareness on so many levels. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you a
Yes.
little better today, and to in some ways meet your very very patient accommodating little
Thank you.
bundle of
Thank you. Thank
sunshine.
you. Thanks for
And
having me.
oh, really my pleasure. And just a reminder to my patrons, we will be chanting. Chant with Caroline is happening this coming Tuesday. I offer that once a month. We normally do very simple one line Sanskrit mantras. I'll break them down for you. And we do it this month, we're doing a deeper dive into the Gayatri mantra. So if you're like, what is that? What is all of that about? Come and join us at 6 p.m. Pacific time on Tuesday. Thank you again for being so generous, Marla Renee. It's really such a delight. And I hope you are able to enjoy the rest of your Pride weekend.
Absolutely.
And I wish you some sleep, because that was the thing I wish
Thank
as a
you.
new mom.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to turn off the camera, and then if Naomi wants, if our participants want to just check in and say a quick thank you and goodbye.